the parishioners have developed so many counter arguments. And so you got into the whole wealth issue, which is very fashionable now.
Yeah, it is.
So, Black families don't have wealth, and the statistics are, incredible. And that's, largely because of redlining, which continued into the 70s. And so people didn't get to, have equities rise on their houses, et cetera. And if you don't have that kind of wealth, then that means that you can't present a tippy-top dossier to college. Why? Well, the idea is that, for one thing, you can't afford the SAT prep courses that allow you to do well on those tests. Now, of course, that's only a partial answer, but you're not supposed to ask any more questions because this is a religion. Or you mention the Caribbean and African immigrants, certainly, and especially if you teach at an Ivy school, you notice that disproportion in terms of Black students. Well, you're not supposed to talk about that because immigrants have a certain kind of pluck, as it's often put. It's always that word, pluck, that native-born Black people can't be expected to have. And therefore, no, they don't have the wealth, but they've got the immigrant pluck. And so there's always something. And what it comes down to is what you're saying is that, Jamel Bowie is a very typical example, and I'm using him by name because he is so damn good at what he does in general. But I frankly find that when it comes to this very small question of race and racism, his views are, I'll put it as, I find him predictable. And I think that it's because, to him, it genuinely is that either it's racism or you're saying there's something wrong with people. And I don't think he's faking. And I'm going to stop saying him because I don't want us to start making it seem like we're jumping on him. But that kind of person really does think that if it isn't racism, then you're criticizing. For one thing, that's what you're taught in school. The more educated you are, the more you've been taught to think that way. And it seems charitable. It feels like something that you say because you don't wish to dump on a people who've been through so much. And I frankly also think, Glenn, that there's an extent to which it's survivor's guilt. If you are one of us who's really lucky, the very last thing you want to do is diss somebody who's out on the corners. And so that explanation is something that you're going to hold on to like you hold on to an inner tube when you're in the middle of the sea. I get it. And I don't think that those people know deep down that they're kidding themselves. I think they really believe it. But what they are lacking is, I think that in some ways, I'm not good at money. I was at a store the other day, I was getting new contact lenses and they were talking to me about rebates. And I had to tell them, and I'm not being dramatic, I said, "Miss, I'm sorry, I don't know what that is." I said, "My wife does all of this. I don't know what a rebate is. I don't know what you're trying to explain. Could I please come back in a week?" That's genuine. I'm going to tell you something else. I don't know what a second mortgage is. I've heard the term, but
Oh my God, John.
I have no idea. That's my ignorance.
Okay.
Now, I think that a lot of people these days, we're going to look back on the early 21st century, and we're going to be surprised at how elementary some people's understanding of social history and sociology can be, in that if a group is having problems, it's either that everybody else doesn't like them or there's something wrong with them, when it could be something in between. And so the reason, for example, that so few middle-class Black students submit tippy-top dossiers is not because the middle-class Black boy gets stopped at a mall by a guard who thinks he stole a shirt. That's not why. It's not racism in any sense that we would really say. On the other hand, it's not that there's something wrong with Black people. It's not that Black people are stupid. It's not that Black people are unfamiliar with hard work. A lot of it is, and this is what I was trying to say in Losing the Race, and I've continued to say, that in the 1960s, when they really started enforcing desegregation of schools, a lot of the teachers were racist and didn't treat Black kids very well. And so by about 1966, that year particularly, Black kids started disidentifying from school as something that white people do. That's when people started saying, "What do you think, you're white for liking school?" And ever since then, there's been this subtle meme in a lot of the Black community that says that you hit the books in order to get something done. You're stepping outside of your real self, and you might do very well at that, but it's going to pull down your performance in general. Whereas everybody else is in school because school is what they do. School is for white people. We just use it in order to get a piece of paper. And that, I think, is a lot of the reason that you have so few Black families, even ones who have a lot of money, who can have their kids submit that tippy-top dossier. It's subtle, but it's powerful, and it has nothing to do with racism, nor does it have anything to do with stupidity. It has to do with the ordinary complexity of the procession of human affairs. And I think that the people we're talking about have been trained to not think about that when it comes to Black people. And I think partly it's because sociology is not explicit enough, partly because of the strong leftward tilt of sociology, to actually allow that there is a such thing as a negative cultural trait that is not the result of present day oppression. Because many people, you know, the Larry Bobos or whatever, will say, oh, well, yes, that's a negative trait, but the reason that they're that way is because of the racism that surrounds them. And the typical op-ed page only knows that. The typical op-ed page doesn't know that a negative cultural trait can persist long past what the original cause was. That's considered a very strange thing to say.
It's also, there's also a problem here of just logical consistency, because if indeed I adopt this deterministic worldview in which the negative cultural expressions are themselves a necessary consequence of oppression, then it would appear to follow that the positive cultural expressions are also a necessary consequence of oppression. If I can't take responsibility for my failures, how is it that I get to take responsibility for my successes? If I'm indeed a bauble at the end of a string that history is pushing hither and yon, then I'm a bauble at the end of a string pushed hither and yon by history. I don't have any agency. I don't get any glory. I don't have any responsibility. Well, I don't get any credit. I don't have any skin in the game. Nothing's on me. Nothing's on me.
Yeah.
I'm serious about this, that there's an existential, philosophical kind of dimension to this. I mean, I can't help the hand that I was dealt. The issue is how I'm going to play the hand that I'm dealt. If I cast myself as victim, if my Weltanschauung, the way I see the world, how I understand experience, is filtered constantly and at every instance through a sieve that catches everything that I had control over, you know, and leaves it all to the gods. In effect, that's what we're talking about. We're gesturing up at the celestial moving bodies, and we're saying it controls our fate. There's something deeply, profoundly pathetic about that. And the idea that it's associated with freedom, I thought the quest, you know, the old quest from abolition onward, this is not freedom in the 21st century. So it's time to perform without a net. It's time to step out on the wire and actually take our chances that we're not as good at physics as the Jews. Right? Okay? Rather than saying that the protocols of the elders of Zion is the reason that so many Jews have Nobel Prizes in physics, is the reason that so many concert pianists and violinists are Jewish, is the reason, etc. I could go on for a very long time. Rather than saying that they're white and they therefore got the benefit of every doubt. When they came out of shtetls in Eastern Europe, some of them did, and you know the whole story of the 20th century and Jews. Rather than ascribing that, I'm talking about as a Black intellectual, as a pundit who might write for the Atlantic or the Daily Beast and try to comprehend what's going on with Black people today. Rather than looking at how many billionaires belong to which group, and there are not so many Black billionaires, and woe is me, and ascribing that to some invisible force called racism, you took responsibility. You owned up to the fact that you're never going to be a billionaire unless you build $1 billion business. And that actually requires starting a business and building it. You're never going to master the fiddle. We can master the saxophone. We can master the fiddle if that's what it came to, without thousands of hours of practice. You're never going to win a Nobel Prize in physics unless you learn calculus when you're 12 years old. What parent is teaching their kids calculus when they're 12 years old? White people are not responsible for the fact that Black people are or are not doing that. There's something soul killing about this way of looking at the conditions of African Americans. There's something profoundly pathetic about it.
Yeah, there is. And we're just at a point where I think this elementary understanding of sociology, especially when it's applied to brown people, really does keep people from thinking beyond a certain paradigm, because, you know, there are always answers, and there's a whole article to be written about the place of rhyming and rhythm in rhetorical discourse among African American people. But yeah, there's something that rhymes that I think, you know, if we were doing this live with the wrong audience, we would be shut down by somebody who stood up. How did it go? If you're white, you're all right. If you're brown, stick around. If you're black, get back. The idea being that the reason that, you know, we can't build anything is because there's just this racism around that keeps us from being able to do what the Jews did because, and somebody always stands up and says, because they were white. And then everybody goes, they were white. And you talk about the Irish and the way the Irish used to basically be black people with white faces in terms of their inner city behavior. No, but they were white. And so that's just considered to be logic itself.